Section 121, Leader Podcast. Today we are in Doctrine and Covenants, Section 121, verse 41. No power or influence can or ought to be maintained by virtue of the priesthood. Only by persuasion, by long-suffering, by gentleness and meekness, and by love unfeigned. This verse has been very influential for me because I grew up as the son of older parents, and there was a lot of things about tradition that were very important to me. And I waited and relished the idea that eventually I might be able to be a leader or I might be able to be in charge. But as I read this verse throughout my life and as I came to understand it, I saw that this applies to the priesthood, but it also applies to nearly every instance of positional authority. So you could say no power or influence can or ought to be maintained by virtue of your position. And I think in the world, from a Babylonian perspective, we have so much of this concept of, well, I'm in charge, so you have to follow what I say. You have to do what I say. And there's no attempt to move beyond the, well, you have to. But I remember distinctly thinking in college, wow, what if you don't have to? What motivation is there left beyond compulsion? And that really kind of started me on the journey of trying to understand these things better. Because if the option of you have to or you must is taken off the table, then what's left for the reasons why people do what they do? But the reality is that most of those reasons, once you take you have to off the table, are reasons that have a lot more heart and soul in them. And that's why as you look at the principles in this chapter and the promises in the end of the chapter regarding the nature of ongoing influence, you see that if your only influence is your power to tell someone else that they must do something, your influence, by definition, is finite. If you've run your household as your children grew up by command and control, where they have to do everything you say, well, as soon as they're 18 and out on their own, then your influence has dramatically diminished. Whereas if, according to this verse and the following verses, you have used persuasion, long-suffering, gentleness and meekness, and love unfeigned, you continue to retain influence. Hence your dominion becomes an everlasting dominion that flows unto you without compulsory means, because you didn't use compulsory means to attempt to maintain and establish it to start with. So yes, it's important that we, insofar as possible, respect authority, respect the priesthood, try to support those things that are right and good. But if the only manner of influence is required influence through compulsion based on a position, that in and of itself is finite. Again, no power or influence can or ought to be maintained by virtue of the priesthood. So let's look at some concepts of authority from a sociological perspective. So you have charismatic authority, which is the authority comes from being a person who others want to follow, who others are naturally attracted to. Again, this is something where people use their own agency to follow someone who they are drawn towards because of the ideas of that person, their way of addressing people, and yes, sometimes their look, but really their general demeanor leads people towards them. If it truly is only looks-based charisma, of course that fades in time. We look at traditional authority, which is that authority that says, hey, these are the traditions, this is the established way of doing things, and so if you jump through the hoops and you get into that position of traditional authority, much like a mother or father or other elements in our society that are tradition-based, there's an expectation that you have authority. However, again, if you rely only on that traditional authority and you don't apply the other principles in these verses that we're talking about, again, these being persuasion, long-suffering, gentleness and meekness, love unfeigned, kindness, pure knowledge, and avoiding hypocrisy and guile, again, even your traditional authority is finite in time. And the third general external authority is rational legal authority, where there's a legal structure that has been set up that gives you authority. And again, very much like traditional authority, it is based on the structure, but your influence stops as soon as you are removed from the position. And the influence often has to be maintained by force and does not lead people towards an infinitely growing influence and ability to influence and bless others for many years. So in the next episode, we'll discuss a little bit more about authority and types of authority and kind of explore where they fall in between these two types. But again, the key element from today is the idea that power and influence can't be maintained in the long run by virtue of the priesthood or by virtue of your position, but it is by the attributes that you manifest that makes it so that people want to follow you, trust you, and are happy to give you an everlasting dominion and influence because you bless them and you make their life better.